예, 안녕하십니까. 과학기술정보통신부 과학기술정책국장 정희곤입니다. 오늘 이 자리에서 대한민국의 과학기술 정책에 대하여 소개하고 앞으로의 정책 방향을 말씀드리고자 합니다. 오늘의 발표의 주요 내용입니다. 먼저 대한민국의 과학기술 가버넌스와 과학기술정보통신부의 기능에 대해서 소개드리겠습니다. 다음으로 한국의 R&D 환경과 과학기술 성과를 살펴보겠습니다. 마지막으로 한국 과학기술 정책의 과거, 현재, 미래에 대해서 말씀드리겠습니다.
I will talk about the past, present, and future of Korea's science and ICT-related
첫 번째로 한국의
policies.
과학기술 가버넌스에 대해서
First of all, speaking of science and ICT governance,
그림과 같이 한국은
as you see in the slide,
대통령 산하의
we have the Presidential Advisory Council on Science and Technology, which serves the functions of policy advisory and coordination.
그리고 각 부처에서는
And different ministries have their own R&D projects depending on their mandates. The Ministry of Science and ICT is in charge of establishing the national policies on science and ICT. And the ministry also carries out various R&D projects, and it manages the nation's R&D projects as well. The ministry's mission is to realize a people-centered fourth industrial revolution so as to develop future industries and to create quality jobs. Our investment is focused on big data, network, and AI-related projects which are deemed key in the fourth industrial revolution. Moreover, we are also making efforts to expand basic research and improve R&D system so that a favorable system or ecosystem is created to ensure future growth and innovation. We also want to make sure that R&D projects ultimately lead to improved quality of life for our citizens. Now let me explain Korea's R&D landscape. Korea's R&D expenditure increased dramatically from 1.2 billion won in 1963 to almost 100 trillion won in 2021. Up until the 1980s, the government was the major investor of R&D projects, but the private investment started to grow, and since 1980s, private sector R&D has played a pivotal role in the nation's R&D endeavors. Government's R&D continued to expand in times of national difficulties, such as the financial crisis in 1997 and in 2008, so that it can lift the country out of the crisis. As was discussed earlier, the Korean government has prioritized and therefore increased its investment in science and ICT-related research and development. This can be confirmed by looking at the proportion of R&D budget to the GDP. As of 2018, the R&D investment to Korean GDP was estimated at 4.53%, which is the world's second largest, only after Israel. Such an intensive investment in R&D has enabled Korea to become one of the most innovative countries in the world. One notable aspect is the active investment in R&D of the private sector. In 2019, the private sector R&D reached $59.1 billion, accounting for 76.9% of Korea's total R&D spending. In particular, we are seeing large-scale investments happening in the manufacturing sector. Specifically, investment in electronics and ICT, both of which Korea has comparative advantages, account for 56% of total manufacturing R&D investment. By corporate size, investment made by SMEs and startups take a relatively smaller proportion, which is an area we need to see improvement. Korea has accumulated global top-tier science and ICT capabilities, and this can be verified by various indices. Since 2017, Korea was ranked number 1 in Bloomberg Innovation Index for a total of 7 times, and in 2019, it was ranked number 1 in OECD Digital Government Index. Korea's competitiveness can also be confirmed by looking at other indices, such as number of triadic patent families per year, the global share of SCI papers, and the number of researchers per 1,000 labor force. As such, based on the active R&D and solid science and ICT capabilities, Korea is leading the global high-tech industries. Numerous achievements have been made, including the world's first commercialization of 32 gig NAND flash memory and world's first 5G service, and development of antibody biosimilar for the first time in the world. Excellent technological prowess has made Korean companies to command number 1 market share in the global memory chips and smartphone markets. However, we do have some areas for improvement in terms of R&D productivity represented by technology trade balance ratio and global network-related indices. It is also imperative to devise strategies that will guide us to realize a successful green transition to achieve sustainable growth. Now I'd like to briefly walk you through the history of Korean government's science and ICT policies. Previously, our policy was geared toward catching up with the advanced countries. But now we intend to become a market leader, leveraging the technological expertise accumulated for the past decades. In the 60s and 70s, when the nation focused its energy on developing its economy, the main priority was to establish basic R&D infrastructure. To pursue technological development in key industries in this period, public research institutes were created to lay a foundation to achieve technological independence. 1980s and 80s and 90s saw active development of high technologies. This is when private companies and universities started to undertake R&D projects in earnest. Driven by growing government support, steelmaking, shipbuilding, and semiconductors and cell phones became Korea's backbone industries. Since 2000, we moved away from our catching-up strategies to implement policies to foster innovation to become a technology leader. As a result, Korea has now become a major powerhouse in ICT, such as mobile phones and 5G network. Let me now turn to the Ministry's 4th National Science and Technology Basic Plan. As you understand, the overarching objective of this plan is to go beyond development of science and ICT to achieve economic development, but to pursue quality of life and contribute to the global humanity by further advancement of ICT. 4 key strategies in this basic plan are as below. First is to build science and ICT capacity to tackle future challenges. We plan to create an environment where researchers are encouraged and motivated to engage in creative research activities. Second is to foster an active science and ICT innovation ecosystem. And measures to promote collaboration projects and to support innovative startups are included in the basic plan. The third is to facilitate science and technology-led job creation in new industries. Amid what we call the 4th Industrial Revolution, we will continue to nurture new industries and create quality jobs. The last one is to create a better life for all through science and ICT. This is important as we envision a warm and inclusive society realized by science and ICT. From now on, I will describe Korea's recent achievements made by some key science and ICT policies. I will first talk about the National Research and Development Innovation Law that was enacted earlier this year. The law aims to create an environment where the autonomy and creativity of researchers are respected and researchers can concentrate on their work. A key aspect of this law is that it recognized and streamlined or reorganized and streamlined R&D-related legal structure. Before it was enacted, different government ministries and agencies had different R&D regulations, and researchers had to be familiar with all those regulations. And now with the enactment of this law, we now have a single act and its subordinate rules. Moreover, the law facilitates creation of researcher-friendly R&D environment. National R&D procedures have been simplified so as to reduce the administrative burden of researchers. An integrated R&D information system has been set up across the ministries so that researchers have easy access to information that's related to carrying out their projects. Moreover, we will continue to instill the spirit of challenge and encourage researchers to try again even if they fail in their initial trials. The government's support for basic research has expanded so as to encourage researchers to be more creative and challenge the establishment. Under the current administration, government expenditure on basic research has grown on a steady manner. Our goal is to double the basic research budget from 2017 to 2022. And the plan is going as planned. And we also have established support programs for different basic research areas, which are being expanded to include other fields. Given the total amount of budget for different fields, representative academic institutes of different disciplines can now plan on their own project structure and support scheme. The project was piloted in the field of mathematics in 2020, and there are 6 disciplines supported in this way in 2021, and it will be expanded to include all basic research in 2022. There are also policies that target innovation capacity improvement at SMEs. First of all, we are increasing the support for R&D effort of SMEs. Under the current administration, R&D support for SMEs grew continuously and more than doubled between 2017 and 2019. We also developed systemized support system according to the growth cycle of companies. What's also important here is that projects developed by SMEs' R&D efforts are purchased in the market so that these companies can continue to innovate. To this end, we introduced trial purchase program on projects developed by or product developed by SMEs and are helping them to secure sales channels by expanding public procurement. We also encourage open innovation and promote joint R&D among industry, academia, and research institute. Aerospace is one area where we are pursuing active R&D. In Newry, the Korea Space Launch Vehicle 2 was launched on October 21st. It was the first test of the launch vehicle independently developed with our own technology from engine design and assembly to test and launch. Although the payload did not achieve the orbital speed, but we were able to secure the key technologies, and it is marked as an important turning point for the development of aerospace technology. We are going to have the second launch in May next year, and we will become the 7th country in the world that will have the capability to launch a payload that's more than 1 ton in weight. Another objective of advancing science and ICT is to contribute to solving global challenges. One example is carbon neutrality. In November this year, during the COP26 meetings, President Moon Jae-in announced Korea would increase its 2030 NDC. In order to be aligned with global efforts, Korea is implementing systemized policies for advancing science and ICT. First of all, we have developed a detailed technology innovation plan to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050. Considering demands of different industries, we've identified 10 key technologies and came up with strategies to secure those technologies. For those 10 key industries or technologies, we will devise detailed development targets and strategies to achieve those targets by 2050, and this will be used as a blueprint for future R&D. Going forward, creating an innovation ecosystem is critical so that technologies for carbon neutrality are actually used to reduce CO2 emissions. To this end, more support will be provided to demonstration and commercialization efforts and to nurture professionals with expertise on carbon neutrality. Now let me switch to the future of Korea's science and ICT policies. Korean policies will be expanded so that it could be used to facilitate innovation. Basically, in addition to promoting and developing advanced technology, we also aim to use science and ICT to solve national and social issues. Moreover, the performance target will have not only quantitative criteria but also qualitative criteria to review policy impacts on our society. When it comes to the scope of policies, we will include non-R&D policy instruments such as deregulation to create an environment that is conducive to innovation. All those changes that I just mentioned will be reflected in the 5th National Science and Technology Basic Plan that is being drawn up right now. In the 5th Basic Plan, there are 4 key strategies of recovery, inclusiveness, survival, and innovation. And the strategies are closely tied to various social and economic issues such as digital transformation, aging, carbon neutrality, and climate crisis response, and creating R&D foundation. So these are the 4 strategies of the 5th Basic Plan. First, recovery is about strengthening resilience in order to achieve fast economic recovery in the wake of a crisis. Second, inclusiveness is to improve quality of life by building a strong social safety net. Third, survival is about cooperating in our response to global crises in order to ensure survival of our nation. And lastly, innovation is to reinforce the National Foundation for Science and Technology, R&D. In Korea, science and ICT policies have played a pivotal role in achieving remarkable economic prosperity. Now it will be pursued so that we can contribute to the global community. With that, I'll finish my presentation. Thank you very much for your attention.